Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Nea Dor's program, Connections with Aisha Yuki. My name is Aisha, and I have the absolute pleasure to host with us today Dr. Sheeza Mohsin. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sheeza.
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Dr. Sheeza Mohsin took on the role of CEO, Executive Director of the Muslim Community Center for Human Services amidst the pandemic and at a time when the world was shut down. With a remarkable set of competencies in communication, executive coaching, leadership, and mental health, she brings compassion and understanding to the Muslim Community Center. The excitement and vision to help strengthen MCC's operations, services, and align them with robust programming designed to meet the community's needs is a primary goal for her. Dr. Mohsin completed a bachelor's in business from New York University Stern School of Business, a master's in family therapy, another master's degree in human resources management from Florida International University, and a PhD from Texas Women's University. Among the myriad of training and certifications that Dr. Mohsin attained, she has also completed coursework in nonprofit leadership at the Kennedy School's Executive Education Program at Harvard University. Supporting marginalized communities and facilitating systemic changes to uplift immigrant communities is close to Dr. Mohsin's heart. She facilitates diversity, equity, and inclusion-based topics repeatedly and is known to be an engaging public speaker frequently sought by the community. She has served on various boards in an advisory capacity, such as the Diversity Council for Carroll ISD and the City of Southlake Library Board, as well as the Multicultural Alliance of Dallas-Fort Worth. And we are so excited to host Dr. Mohsin today. So Dr. Mohsin, I know I just gave a quick overview of your background, but we really want you to tell us in your own words a little bit about your journey in the professional space of mental health and wellness.
Aisha, thank you so much. It was so unnecessary to talk about my profile. You know, it has been a very interesting journey for me, and without spending too much time on my career, which is about 25 or so years in the human resources area. I started noticing as I specialized in working with leaders that you excel, but when they struggle with mental health and when they struggle with emotional issues, you really cannot prioritize anything. Very apparent to me that regardless of my training in coaching, leadership development, and all that I had the honor and pleasure to receive, if I was not trained in mental health and emotional issues, especially as it relates to being an immigrant and a person of color in our community, there was going to be a gap. And so for the past decade, I have been heavily involved in mental health work. I have a private practice, and I have the pleasure to serve at the Muslim Community Center. And it's been a very, very humbling journey.
That's amazing. So obviously you're doing all of this and you are a Pakistani American woman. So I have to ask, what have been some challenges that you have faced as a Pakistani American woman serving in a leadership role in the community?
That's a very difficult question, and it is an important one for us to address. As women, we are growing in the space of leadership. And so I'm very, very honored and privileged to be in this role. Before I answer this question, I also want you to know that I am not making a blanket statement for everyone that I talk about, because there are lots of great, great individuals that I've had the pleasure of working with. But one thing that I do want to point out that has been a challenge for me is the segregation that we have in our community. And because we are set up to where there is more male privilege, working alongside the decision makers in the community becomes a challenge, because a lot of those spaces are very protected spaces where mostly men are allowed. And while I am so grateful for the few who are becoming very brave to include women in those very important discussions, we have a long way to go. And that becomes very difficult because when you are working and trying to understand the systemic changes needed, and a whole gender is kind of excluded from the conversation, the solutions are not going to be holistic. And being an advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really believe that that's where we fall short. And I think that it costs the community a little bit as well, because while there's a lot of weight of responsibility of solutions on the shoulders of men in our community, an opportunity to engage with women leaders will only bring the community into a better space. And that becomes a struggle because access to those tables becomes very limited being a woman. So that's one thing that stands out. And of course, there are many, many other challenges, but I feel that that is a primary one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think what you said about having women as a part of the conversation so that they can contribute to the solutions is so important because a lot of times, I mean, women are the people that are struggling in the first place, right, with a lot of these issues. And so if you're not even giving them an opportunity to lead, then, you know, how are we going to progress as a community? So thank you for putting that so eloquently.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And I so appreciate you asking that question because it's an important one.
Yeah, for sure. So our next question that we have for you is, how has the COVID pandemic contributed to mental health issues in the community? I know this is a very, you know, very publicized issue nowadays, but I think like now that we're coming out of the pandemic, it's really a good time to kind of take a look back and really see how things have changed, you know, and I feel like everyone is just in a rush to just get into the next thing, but I don't think the community is pausing to reflect on how this pandemic has really impacted the mental health of our community.
I want to tell you that the pandemic has been a test for our community in so many ways, at so many levels. And Aisha, you could imagine, you and I could talk about that for the entire hour and we would still run out of time because our community struggles in two ways. One, that we have issues and challenges that every other community has. You know, living in America, you know, you have financial distress, you have emotional distress, you have family distress. And then on top of it, for the Muslim community, the South Asian Muslim community, you're dealing with stereotypes, you're dealing with stigma of the community, you're dealing with Islamophobia. And on top of it, when the pandemic came, I feel that it tested everything that was critical and important for us. So if you had worked on your relationships pre-pandemic, the pandemic was a beautiful experience for your family, for your work, if your priorities were well balanced. And if you had been putting some of those things off, it was a true test because it really tested what we were shoving under the rug a lot.
Oh,
Because
wow.
that isolation, that just being locked in the home around each other, lack of space just brought to the front all that was needing to be dealt with. And so all relationships were compromised. And I'm not saying that this applied to just people who may be struggling in those spaces. It applied to people who were strong in those spaces as well. You know, because the length of time the pandemic, Aisha, was very painful for many. What it did do, and I really like looking at the glass half full, is I think it is forcing our community to pay more attention to these things and to realize that we cannot them. Because our community as an immigrant community has already tried in career and success in the professional field. Success in the emotional, relational field has not been that much of a priority for many. And I will not say for all. And I think it's time that we take another look to look at the emotional needs, the mental health needs of the community, and know that a healthy mind is the only way you can get to all of those things.
Great. I mean, that's so true. And I don't think I've ever heard it that way, you know, to think of it as a test. And definitely, I mean, whenever you are put under pressure, that's really when you see what resources you have and what priorities you've made in your life. And, you know, as immigrants, as you mentioned, it's been really difficult, I think, for the community to really take a introspective look into how the pandemic has impacted our mental health overall. So, I guess along the same line of that, if you look at other communities, they talk so freely about, oh yeah, I'm going to go see my therapist, and you hear things like that. But when it comes to like for our community, for example, why do you think that mental wellness is such a taboo topic for us?
I am so, so grateful that you're asking this topic. And I have so many responses, Aisha, but I'll start here. One of the fundamental things that I see in our community, and to my understanding, Aisha, it's a recent development. I want to say the last maybe year or um, the last decade, I would like to say, that we have been growing into the space of presenting perfection and glorifying.
Mm.
And I'm putting this out because, back home, I grew up in an environment where we would talk about real issues. This one is having this struggle, this one is having this challenge, this one needs a job, this one is having marital problems, this one has these issues with parent-child relationships. Now there's this very, very pressing need to report perfection
Mm.
that feeds into topic. So help seeking behavior and admitting that there could be mental illness, I feel, is like step 4.
Mm.
And why I'm saying that is a lot of space of mental health, people seek it only when there's a crisis. And
Mhm.
it's the emergency room, and that being your medical and physical health program. And that's really not healthy. So that feeds into the problem. Why it's a taboo topic is, again, coming from that same space of presenting broken. Our culture has really, really put a lot of stigma and shame around struggling emotionally. And the reality is, all of us struggle emotionally. And then on top of it, if there is a disorder or there is a mental illness that's been declared, research science has done so much study on it, there is taboo about even seeking that help. And people have all kinds of, I work in the community a lot, and I hear all kinds of issues. If I
Yeah.
tell people that my daughter has, she won't be able to get married.
Yeah.
If I tell people son is struggling and has, something as painful, and I'm going to say painful because a lot of people are judging it as an issue. So if my son has something as painful as bipolar disorder that they're struggling with,
Mhm.
how is he going to launch it here? And I'm telling those families that if you focus on that,
Mhm.
your contacts might pile the job, but it will not be able to sustain the job for him if you don't get help.
Right.
So we have so many stigmas. If somebody finds out my child is going through divorce, we will look like there was something wrong with her.
Mhm.
And so we feed into those taboos, which really make it so hard for our youth, for our women,
Mhm.
and I want to say for our men also,
Mhm.
because there is a work that men need to have done with their growth. But if we just are busy stigmatizing, they will not be comfortable accessing help. So there's a lot of taboo there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you feel like our social media and then influencer culture, just this whole like going back to your point of presenting as perfect, right? Do you think that also contributes to some of the taboos in society?
Absolutely. Because remember, glorification and perfection is what we present. I
Mhm.
would be so excited if people would say, you know what? I had a really bad day today. So, like if you also had a bad day. But
Mm.
what people is their vacations. They present how wonderful they are. They present blessings. What will be very, very helpful is when people say, you know what? And especially when strong men and women say that. Today
Yeah.
was a tough, I don't know how I got through it.
Mhm.
40% in research, 33 to 40% of interaction, people who interact with social media
Mhm.
experience depression because seeing people have makes them feel more what they don't have.
I see. Yeah.
So that feeds into the perfection. You know, I over time have become a very cautious consumer of social media.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And I think that's something that, when, for example, I think Facebook launched roughly like maybe 14, 15 years ago. I think I was a freshman in undergrad at the time. And, I saw this shift in how social circles kind of presented themselves and how people presented themselves. So, definitely all connected to the mental health area. I want to kind of dig in a little bit into our community and kind of with your experience, dealing with your clients and the things that you see in your office. For our Pakistani American viewers specifically, what trending issues, cultural barriers do you see that are impacting South Asian parent-child relationships in the US?
It is such a painful relationship that I cannot even begin to express. And the pain I notice with children and with parents. And I want to see, because it will sound to be more responsible, which I am, but I want to make sure that I recognize that this is a very tough thing to experience when you are experiencing a relationship challenge with your child. There is so much limitation in skill of being able to be expressive and compassionate from the parent side. Pakistani Americans and immigrants forget that the models of parenting that we come from are dated and they're not effective and they don't work. And then on top of it, we send our children to the school system where the one thing I can tell you is that the school system may have many challenges, but it teaches kids to be compassionate, understanding. It teaches them a very language. And then when they go home, and they don't get reciprocity in that expression, and they don't get validation, and they see their friends' parents who are being so validating and getting praise, and again, I'm stereotyping right now because I know, the maximum praise they get from their parents is good job.
Sure. There are memes about it. Yeah.
And it is just so sad. And the realization that just because we upgraded from our parental model 1.0 to 2.0 is the lack of realization that the children in a 10.0 world. So there is a huge in just that language. And then what happens is that for Pakistani parents who are struggling, I notice a very fear-based approach, which ends up looking like a very control-based approach. And that shows up in their actions, in their language, which just presents, and the danger, Aisha, is that as these kids are growing up, they're losing credibility for their parents.
Right.
So by the time they need to listen to their parents, the parents have not spent the formative years nurturing those relationships and now expect to be heard, followed, and obeyed. And so it's causing so many issues. It breaks my heart because I see struggling, and it's not like parents are happy about it. They just don't know what to do. And seeking mental health is so taboo. So they won't, and they'll struggle, and they'll just pray that nobody finds out what's happening behind closed doors.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that is a very, it's a very enlightening observation, because if you look at the education system and you see where, if the kids are getting a certain training and the parents are completely missing that training, if obviously you can think of education and training as a little interchangeable, and that really nails it, right? Because the parents are just going based off of what they were taught and what training they received, and they are not kind of in the loop on like how their children are getting educated and how they're evolving. And really by the time they get back from school, it's just time to make sure that they're fed and that they're clean and that it's bedtime. You have that limited window, and it's how much can you do, right, in that limited window? And if you are just trying to bring in that control at the time and discipline, that can be very, very difficult, especially when kids are comparing their families to other families. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope that this is a very beneficial insight to our viewers on this topic. Along the same route, is it true that checking in with your counselor twice a year, for example, should be something that everyone does annually, similar to doctor and dentist visits? And if so, why would that be so important?
I sometimes feel that instead of being the most important organ in our body, the mind is treated as a stepchild. I had heard a TED talk once, and it just resonated with me, that if you have an issue with your stomach or your GI issues, you would go to the doctor, you would have no issue. And if you've ever struggled, you would make sure to get a preventative checkup in a year. Whether it is a financial advisor, whether it's a CPA, whether it is a personal trainer, we take a lot of pride when we seek professional help because that helps us know that for critical components of our life, we are protecting them. Mental health is no different. You have to go because a lot of times, and I will put in a caveat there, if you're a parent, if you're a leader, if you or your family is reliant on you for income generation, it is mandatory that you look after your mental health. And so just checking your emotion and having that very, very free conversation that's judgment-free space is very powerful. And I'll tell you, a lot of people say we have family, we have friends. I will tell you that it's not the same. Because you're still managing your impression, you're still being guarded and not vulnerable when you talk to them. Very few, and I'd like to come out with a random number, maybe 10 to 15% of families have that. The rest of the 85 don't. And then also really important for men. You know, a lot of men have privilege, but I will tell you in the space of mental health, help-seeking behaviors, it's a more taboo thing for men. So struggle the most. You know, in my private practice, 40% of my clientele is men. And it's so funny, a lot of times, you know, their wives are the ones that drag them in, and the men are the ones that stay. Because for women, they're still able to talk about it, but for men, it's very hard. And so I will invite anybody, I do that myself, sure that I practice what I preach. And it's critical for me that twice a year I make sure, and when I go through that I am making sure that I have sought out, you know, help and checked in and so forth.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's great that you mentioned, you know, this reliance on family and friend, which is not a bad thing, right? But it's just its own separate space. Like, you know, you should have that healthy family and friend network, the village, you know, as we refer to it. But sometimes family and friends can give really bad advice, and I think that, you know, if you are limited to that circle of people, you don't necessarily have the tools or the skill set to be able to distinguish between what is good advice versus really bad advice. So thanks for mentioning that.
I appreciate you saying that because there's a place for everyone in our pizza pie of life relationships. Family is supposed to tell you, you know what, you're right. I completely agree with you. And you need that support because when criticism from family, it lands so heavy.
Yeah.
But when a neutral party is telling you, you know, not a good idea, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to rethink. Yeah. So it's a completely different, you know, you're smart enough to know that I need a diversity. It's like having a tribe, a board of directors for your life. And your therapist has to be one.
Absolutely. I love it. A board of directors for your life. That is great. It's gold. So for couples here, you know, in the US, young couples looking to get married, what would be the benefits of checking in with the family therapist for premarital counseling before tying the knot?
Oh my goodness. I cannot tell you how passionate I feel about this area and the importance of this because I see relationships going through so much strain, especially as times are changing. You know, for immigrant families, it's so important to check in because Aisha, we, just like other communities, so these are not unique issues. Marriages are tough. It's probably the toughest relationship you work on. But what is important to realize is that it compounds for immigrants, especially South Asians, because we have two sets of values that we are juggling with, depending on our immigration journey, depending on our upbringing, depending on where we were born and raised. And so the value system is so interesting because we don't know which mind we are working from in different dynamics of the relationship. So while you could have been born and raised here, but your values around marriage could be very, very different and rooted in the home country. And so people come together, checking those assumptions is critical, and critical at a time where baggage has not been built, where resentment is not kicked in already. It's such a beautiful space to say, you know what, when we go through this tough time, what are we going to do? How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to fight fair? You know, I my couples all the time, and you know, in MCC where we have a training clinic, my clinical counselors who are training, I tell them all the time that, Bollywood is there to train our community on how to have a good party and how to have a romantic song and a dance. We have to teach them how to fight fair and
Mm,
how to fair after they have made mistakes, because that's normal. It's normal to really not do a good job in something. It's
yeah,
normal to not know whether you should have prioritized your parent or you should have prioritized your wife or your husband.
yeah.
So there, how do you recover from that without impacting or straining a relationship? So it is critical, and I hope more people consider it.
Thank you so much for your insights on that. For our final question of today's show, what is your vision for the Muslim Community Center for Human Services, and the type of services it aspires to provide to our community in the area of mental health and wellness?
I will tell you, Aisha, the Muslim Community Center for Human Services is one of the most unique models, which drew me to come and work for it and to really support it. And it presents a support system for our community that hopefully people will be able to access before they come into crisis. So our services are low cost, from medical to dental. And one of the biggest areas of growth for us right now, based on community need, is counseling and social services, mental health services, and community education. Because remember, an educated and informed community is a strategy. So we are doing a lot of work since I've started. We have reorganized and have a clinical counseling training center, and by of which we can offer low-cost counseling to people, as well as free counseling to eligible families. We are looking at social services and expanding the need to understand what benefits people have here in this country. So many people don't understand what they have, and that really directly impacts their well-being. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we need the community's support to make sure that they are also understanding that this is a long-term investment, and everybody has to do their part in growing mental health and wellness for our community, which is the only way to go now, given all that we have experienced, especially due to the pandemic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, just for your time, for being here, and just for your leadership in this space. I think it's so important to see Muslim women, Pakistani women taking the lead in this space. The DFW Muslim community is very thankful and blessed to have your leadership here. So thank you so much, and we look forward to continue to see the work that you're doing. Take care, and that concludes the show. Thanks, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.